If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fists. My name is Frank Latirzo, full-time observer, part-time writer, joined by 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, smiling Jack Hirsch. Jack, how you doing tonight?
Hey, good. There's a lot to talk about this week, Frank. I mean, sometimes we have some real down weeks and we have to struggle to get the news out. But I think a lot of newsworthy things have recently happened,
Jack,
and they're going to happen.
There are a lot of good things to talk about. First of all, did you have a nice Memorial Day?
I had a wonderful Memorial Day. What Memorial Day weekend, watching boxing, the Saudis, 7 solid hours of entertainment at a reasonable pay-per-view price. You know what I noticed too? There could be a tip for our viewers getting pay-per-view. On the Zone, it was advertised at $69.99. But off my TV, the cable, that was the Zone's broadcast, it was $39.99.
That's what I paid for it.
You paid $30, right? But if you went directly to the Zone off my iPad or you went off your laptop, I originally saw it advertised as $69.99, unless they dropped the price at the end, which I would think they wouldn't.
I know this, Jack. It took me a long time to find it. I was trying to play with a remote for 3 hours, or I mean, not 3 hours, but a little bit for 3 different days, and I didn't figure it out till like about, let's see, maybe 10 o'clock the day of the fight.
Watch it on TV, any pay-per-view thing. If you can watch it on TV, you just go to the pay-per-view channel. It's pretty easy to click on, as opposed to figuring it out off a laptop.
I just went to the remote, Jack, and I said 5 versus 5. Then I did Zhang versus Wilder. And finally I got it. Now, look, what I liked about it was I liked these Saudi fights because the card was good. It started at 2 o'clock. And the main event, which ended in the 5th round, was over at 8:30. There was still plenty of the night left. You had time to wind down. And I love what's going on with the Saudis, Jack. I think it's great. I don't think we would be seeing all these fights. I mean, they were hinting the other night that maybe Crawford and Canelo may be close to being signed. If it wasn't for the Saudi money, that wouldn't be realized. And I just hope that it continues. I worry about what happens if they run out of money, which doesn't seem possible, but if they do or they get bored, then what?
But bottom line is this, Frank, how can the Saudis make a profit? I don't understand this. They're the best thing that's happened to boxing in ages. These guys are unbelievable. I'll bow down to them. I mean, I will literally get on my hands and knees and bow to them. Okay? Not just figuratively, for what they're providing boxing-wise. These guys are wonderful. And even the production, all the people they're bringing it in to make it a more entertaining TV production. And now they're talking, oh, yes, we're working. We expect to get it done, the Crawford-Canelo fight. It's like they're talking like it's inevitable. No, like no problem. And even Canelo, who's one of the hardest guys to deal with, they'll throw so much money his way. Canelo's going to think, okay, if I get beat, then I'm getting a couple of $100 million. It might take me 6-7 fights to make that. Plus, I'm going to have a rematch clause I could activate in all probability with Crawford. And Crawford will probably get thrown $50 million his way for the initial fight being told. But if you win that fight, you're locked in for $100 million for Canelo rematch. And I don't know whether those are the totals. I'm just speculating. I could be way off. I mean, this is just
Jack. Teddy Atlas said it in between one of the fights. He said, "Look," he says, "boxing is healthy again, and it's relevant again." So I agree with him. I think it's great. As far as Crawford and Canelo, I'm a huge Terrence Crawford fan, Jack. I think that's a bridge too far. I think if Crawford lost that fight, he'd become like Michael Spinks losing to Tyson. That's sadly the fight people would remember him for. But there's a lot of people who hold an opinion about this sport that I value, and they think that Crawford has a shot to beat Canelo if the fight is real live.
Crawford has more than a shot. He will beat Canelo, but that's an argument for another time.
Wait, he will beat him?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But as far that's a discussion for another time. Wait till they sign it, and then we could get into the pluses and minuses of both guys. But Spinks is more remembered as being a great light heavyweight champion now than being knocked out by Tyson. I think most people, when they hear Michael Spinks' name, they don't think, oh, that's the guy that got knocked out in the round by Tyson. They think in terms of a great light heavyweight
I think
champion.
Boxing people think that. I think quasi fans think of Tyson.
Oh, well, yeah. It's funny the way legacies get formed. But, okay, speaking of legacies, let's get to the show that was on Saturday. I mean, Deontay Wilder was on the main event. And, Frank, I'm not just saying this. I picked, 3 of the fights, the 2 heavyweight fights, correct. I picked Du Bois and I picked Zhang. I believe I said it on the air, the Zhang fight, that I picked Zhang to knock Wilder out. I thought in 4 rounds he knocked him out in 5 rounds. Not surprised in the slightest. I thought Wilder was a shot fighter going into the fight. I didn't think the Joseph Parker match was a fluke. I thought he had nothing left. I think one of the biggest myths in boxing is the last thing a fighter loses is his punch. That could.
I agree with you on that.
That might be one of the first things. They just don't have the power for whatever reason. Maybe they're still physically strong in a shoving contest, but something about and it's the way they throw the punch. Maybe it's the velocity, the timing, whatever the reason. You notice these guys when they get older, they're normally not big punchers. Now people are going to point to George Foreman. And let me squash that argument right now. Number 1, Michael Moorer didn't have the best chin. Number 2, in old George Foreman, he couldn't dent the chin of Alex Stewart, Lou Savarese, and Tommy Morrison, guys who were, hittable, who a young George Foreman would have obliterated.
Jack, I agree. George Foreman was a much bigger puncher in the 70s than he was in the 80s and early 90s. But here's where George Foreman kind of throws things off. In the 70s, in his prime, Jack, he had such an abundance of strength and power that even if he lost 20% of it, he was still ahead of everybody else. That's why guys like Ron Lyle and Ernie Shavers, when they came back and tried to do what Foreman did, they embarrassed themselves. Foreman is the biggest physical freak of nature I've ever seen in boxing. As for Wilder, Jack, I think it's pretty obvious now that we can look back that the Wilder-Fury trilogy took it out of both of them. Neither guy is the same guy. Look, I was sure Zhang was going to win.
It doesn't physically, fights like that don't physically take anything out of you at all. It's emotionally what it does to you, losing in that type of fashion the way Wilder did to Fury. You're not the same a lot of times afterwards. So I don't want to hear, well, it took it all out of him. Case in point, Wilder.
Jack,
Fury,
neither guy has been the same since the trilogy. Neither guy has looked good one time. What are you talking about? Neither guy, Jack, neither guy has looked good since the trilogy. And the fight that went the distance, Wilder had him down twice with monumental shots. Did he get up? Barely. Okay. In the second fight, Wilder took a hellacious beating. Fury didn't, but Wilder did. But in their third fight, That
Which
was
was
a
part of the
mini
year.
version of the Thrill in Manila. Wilder hit Fury with shots, Jack, that you saw his whole body quiver. Neither one of those guys has been the same since that fight. No, I disagree with you there, Jack. I think that fight, and I think looking back now, neither one of them have looked good since that fight. Fury spit the bit against Ngannou, ran out of gas against Usyk, and what did Wilder do? Helenius, one punch?
Fury stopped Dylan White pretty easily, before the Ngannou
Okay,
fight.
Jack. Okay, he had enough left to
Dylan
stop
White,
him. Does that make him a
not much.
world beater?
No, okay, but speaking of Wilder, for whatever reason, I think mentally a lot goes out of you when you lose your aura of invincibility the way he lost to Fury, getting stopped, in their last two contests. And, it's what it is. Wilder might carry on. Everyone's assuming he's going to retire. If Wilder carries on, he becomes a gatekeeper at this point. No more than a gatekeeper. They were hoping to match him with Jared Anderson if he was going to win this fight. I don't understand why, if he was going to beat Zhang, why not just throw him in with Joshua? I think that's what Eddie Hearn wanted, but they were going to match with Jared Anderson. You want to know something?
Jack.
Wilder might go home. You know the way fighters are, Frank. Wilder might go home and decide, I just want to give it one more try, which would be a big mistake.
Well, if they throw a lot of money at him, he may do that. But Jack, Wilder's done.
Now.
He's done.
He's done.
Jack,
He
Zhang
was done
is
before
slower
this
than a sundial. And he didn't throw any punches, and Wilder was still tentative the whole fight. Wilder is shot mentally, he's shot physically, and the fact that he turned his back and almost ran away, and that's how he got knocked out, that just shows you he is finished. Look, he never had a lot of skill. He was never a physically strong guy as far as his physicality goes. He had one tool. He had a good right hand. And if he could line you up for it and catch you at the end of it, he could hurt you. But Fury showed in the second fight, and I have said this a lot over my lifetime. If you back punchers up and smother them, they can't get their feet set and they can't hit. Fury showed that in the second fight. He did it in the third fight. Only Wilder was better prepared. Wilder got his shots off, but Wilder, Jack, in a way, we're going to touch on Ali's death or passing later. But you know what? You always say he's an underachiever. Maybe Wilder is an overachiever. Look at he had nothing but one tool. He started late, and look how much money he made. And he did defend the WBC title 9 or 10 times.
Well, let me ask you this question, because this weekend is the International Boxing Hall of Fame inductions. Wilder's name is he's going to be on the ballot in 5 years, 3 years, when his time is up. With Wilder, is he a Hall of Fame or not?
Jack, there you go. I have to think about it. The case for him is he made 9 or 10 title defenses. But what are his signature wins?
Champion in a normal era. If we're talking about who the real heavyweight champion is, where it's one guy, we're talking during the time of Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, Jack Dempsey, etc., etc. If Wilder was in an era like that, I'm not talking about those guys. Only one heavyweight champion. Was he ever the best heavyweight in the world at any point?
He was always ranked below. Well, Fury beat him, and he was always ranked below Joshua. So I don't think so. I don't think he was ever the best heavyweight in the world.
So if they didn't have the extra titles, but I got to give Wilder credit for something. You might look at his opponents. Who did he beat? When he beat Luis Ortiz in their first fight, Luis Ortiz was a tremendous threat. And also, Deontay Wilder was on his way to Russia to fight Povetkin there. They told him, you have to fight Povetkin. And he said, okay, I'll fight him there in Russia.
That would have been a good win.
Exactly. He showed no fear at all. None at all.
He never, Jack, Wilder always was willing. I don't put him down for that. So to answer your question, I'm going to say I think he'll make it, but if I were voting, I don't think I would vote for him. His achievement, like you said, split title, never was the best heavyweight. We look back now, maybe the punch was a little bit overrated, didn't have a lot of skill. And if we look at his best win, it was Ortiz. And then I can come back to you and say, well, who's the best guy Ortiz beat? You got to think about that, right?
Yeah, I would have to look at his record. I don't have it in front of me, but I know how highly regarded Luis Ortiz was, and he knocked out Ortiz twice. The second time Ortiz wasn't quite as feared, but the first time around, he posed a genuine threat. And keep this in mind, Wilder was the one chasing after Joshua. He never played it safe like these other heavyweights. The way Joshua was playing it safe, Joshua avoided Wilder for the longest time. So maybe, just maybe, Wilder at one point was the best heavyweight in the world by default because Joshua refused to fight him and refused to settle the debate. Now, a lot of people who would have picked Wilder to knock Joshua out when they were both at their peaks. Maybe Joshua's still at his peak. Who knows? But certainly,
Jack, let me ask you this.
Good.
Let me ask you this. Ernie Shavers is not in the Hall of Fame, correct?
Correct.
Do you think he belongs there?
No. Ernie Shavers never won a belt. But let me tell you something. Substitute Ernie Shavers for Wilder in this era, okay? I'm not sure Ernie Shavers would have been consistent enough to make all those title defenses. He was inconsistent. Wilder at least was more consistent. I mean, Wilder didn't quite have the stamina problem that Ernie Shavers had. Ernie Shavers could suddenly fall apart, but...
Okay, so they both were dependent on their right hand.
Yeah.
Neither was a great boxer. I think Shavers had the better left. Wilder had better conditioning. As far as who had the better chin, Shavers really, you had to, some people put his chin down, but you had to hit him a lot of times. I mean, everybody that stopped him. Now, I didn't see his stoppage by Ron Standard, but
yeah,
Holmes had to hit him a lot of shots.
Stamina issues with Shavers.
Right, more so than his chin. Okay.
In my mind, as far as the Wilder punch, you might say maybe we overrated it. But this is what sticks out in my mind. I did an interview with Joey Dwechko, however you pronounce his name, the Philadelphia heavyweight. He was in camp sparring with all the top guys from Vladimir Klitschko, et cetera, Lennox Lewis, all the top guys. He told me, and he didn't like Deontay Wilder, okay? That's the one guy he didn't like, on a personal level. I don't mean he disliked them. They just didn't get along. Wilder wasn't nice to him. But he said, without a doubt, Wilder was the hardest puncher he's ever, sparred with. So that leaves an impression like, wow, you were with all the big boys, the Lennox Lewises, the Vladimir Klitschkos, and you're calling Wilder the hardest puncher. So that tells me that power had to be for real.
Okay, Jack. Here's my counter to that. Most people, I don't even think it's most. I think anyone who has any kind of a boxing acumen or any kind of historical perspective would say Sonny Liston was tougher and had a better chin than Floyd Patterson, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Willie Reddish told myself and Curtis Parker more than a few times in the gym that Sonny told him that Ali was a much harder puncher than people think he is or that he ever got credit for. However, talked to Floyd Patterson, and I know people that knew him well, and Floyd Patterson always said Ali couldn't punch a bit. So I think it all depends on who you talk to as far as who hits harder. I mean, I can relate that to some of the guys I boxed with and who weren't supposed to be big hitters, and other guys I thought they were presumed to be bigger hitters. So, I mean, yeah, that counts because the guy was in the ring with him. But look, Wilder had the speed. He could get that shot off, but boy, he really did need everything set to take you out. He didn't have short power. He didn't have a hook, much of a hook or an uppercut. But I'll give him the power, Jack. But I think he was very limited. I don't think he was very strong or durable, but he was a workout machine, always in shape. I think he just misses the cut with the Hall of Fame, though. And I think he's totally done, washed up, and finished. And if Anthony Joshua fights him, I won't buy it.
No, they're not going to make the fight. He's done. I mean, now he'd be a gatekeeper. If Wilder absolutely wanted to fight bad enough, yeah, they would throw him in with someone, maybe Jared Anderson, give him one more chance, and he would lose that fight. Speaking of the guy who beat him, Zhang, okay, what's going to be with Zhang? I thought for a little, right after the fight, he might be in the Anthony Joshua sweepstakes. Anthony Joshua now is apparently going to fight Daniel Dubois, who beat Hrgovic. I never was impressed with Hrgovic. And Dubois is improving. He's on an upswing. It's not a lock for Joshua to beat him. And it's a good fight to make in the UK. It'll be appealing.
I think Joshua handles Dubois.
I think so, but he's not a lock to beat him. But I kind of wonder, would Zhang have somehow been a little more of a threat to Joshua, only because Zhang is truly a big punch. He has nothing else going for him, basically, but his power. He's slow. He can't cut off the ring, but he does move forward. And if he landed one of those hooks on Joshua, he could put Joshua out a lot easier than Daniel Dubois would.
But boy, Joshua would hit him too. He'd have no trouble landing on him. If Joshua went in there with the ideas, I'm going to jab and pick my spots, I think he could make it tough on Zhang.
But Zhang might be able to take all of Joshua's punches and slowly move in, and it only takes one punch. But if they detour to Zhang, it looks like Dubois is going to get the fight with Joshua. But if they do that, Dubois has a ready-made opponent because Joe Joyce fights Derek Chisora next month. And if Joe Joyce wins, this gives Dubois a chance to avenge his first career loss. It would be an acceptable fight. I think Joe Joyce has went so far backwards with the two Zhang knockouts.
Maybe him and Wilder should fight, and the loser be done.
I think Chisora, who you could say is all used up if you want, I think he beats Joe Joyce. That's how bad I think Joe Joyce is now. I know.
If I had to pick that fight right now, Jack, I think I would go with Joyce.
Yeah, but did you see how Joyce is so slow and robotic? Yeah, common sense tells you that Joyce should win because Chisora is way past it. But just on heart going to Joe Joyce can't pull the trigger on things. But
Chisora is going to take it to him, Jack, and he's not going to have to be as sharp. So he's going to get his shots off. What I realized when I was watching the Zhang fight with Wilder, okay, look, I didn't even do a post on the fight, Jack, because I thought it was a mismatch and there was no intrigue. I don't know anybody that picked Wilder, and I'm not picking on you, but it does make me laugh to some of these guys that as soon as the fight was over, I called it. Okay, really? Zhang was like a 5 or 6 to 1 favorite. Everybody knew Joshua was washed up.
I wouldn't have picked Zhang over younger Wilder. Let me make that clear. I wouldn't have picked him on the Wilder of like 6 years ago or whatever. I would have picked Wilder to win that fight. I would have picked him to knock Zhang out.
I can't put myself in that predicament, Jack. All I can tell you is this: when they lined up the fight, I didn't think it was any kind of its contest, and I just thought that Zhang, I thought he would actually look better than he did, but it turned out he didn't have to look that good. He just had to catch him because the fight was brutal to watch until the 5th round. But when I was watching the fight, and you kind of touched on it to open this part of the segment, I was thinking to myself, okay, who could Zhang fight that I would pick to beat him? I'm not sure I would pick Joshua to beat him. I'm not sure I would pick Agel Cabell, or however you say his name, the guy that beat Frank Sanchez. I'm not sure I would pick Jared Anderson to beat him, which goes to show, Jack, I think it's pretty much accepted and clear. The best heavyweight in the world is Alexander the Bachelor Usyk. He is clear. There's nobody I could pick to beat him, and I couldn't pick Zhang to beat him either.
Frank, we both picked Usyk to beat Fury on a close decision, okay?
And he did.
Very close decision, and the fight went the way we thought it would. And we both agree it was a very close fight. I think I had Usyk up 1 point. I think you had him up 1 point as well. That's darn close. That doesn't show superiority. That means if Fury can come back and just make some slight adjustments. And my feeling is Fury doesn't have to get better. And I'll agree with you. Let's say he can't get better. All Fury has to do is hold serve. He can be the same Tyson Fury in the rematch as he was in the first fight. Do you agree he could be the same Tyson Fury in the rematch? Not getting better, but be the same, hold serve.
I think if he doesn't blow up like a balloon, I think he can be that guy again.
Okay, consider this. Usyk, his victory over Fury reminds me of the first fight Frazier and Ali. Frazier came back to Ali for the next 2 fights that he lost. The Ali of the second and third Frazier fight wasn't going to beat the Frazier their first fight. It was Frazier who came back. Ali had to just be the same. He did, he could have even slipped a little, Ali, but Frazier would have slipped more. And that was the difference. And that's why I think Fury wins the rematch, because I don't think Usyk is going to be quite as good. He still might be pretty good, but I think Usyk will lose that little edge that he had the first time. And if Fury could just be the same, that's going to tilt things in Fury's favor.
Here's why I disagree with you. Because I think Fury's shot. I'm not sure he can be as good the next time. I like the proposition that he is finally going to go in the ring where he has to prove something. And I know a lot of people don't want to buy this, but I'm sorry. I don't think he feared Usyk. I don't think he thought Usyk was as good as he was. I think even though he trained hard, I think there was a part of him. He didn't take him light, but he didn't have the urgency that Usyk had. I know Usyk's going to stay in shape. I just don't think Fury can get that big body in good enough shape to beat Usyk a second time, because I think Usyk is the type guy, Jack. I do think if he's not quite what he was the last time, he'll be real close to it, and I'm just more confident in him. But my pick is more against Fury than it is on Usyk. Again, the Ngannou fight scared me to death, and you know this as well as anybody. Had Fury never fought Ngannou, I would have picked him to beat Usyk. The only reason why I picked Usyk was because I saw that fight, and Fury didn't show me enough. Even though it was close, he hurt Usyk to the body. He had some big rounds, and if you think about it, if you take one round out of the fight, it was pretty even. But I just have more confidence in Usyk coming back and being closer to who he was than I do Fury.
Fair enough. That tentatively they're talking, I think, December 21st, right before Christmas.
I have a feeling that's not going to happen, but I know they're talking that.
We'll see. I mean, I had a hard time making the first fight. I'd imagine the money's lucrative enough for Fury. He's not going to delay things. I would think not. But
let's talk about Hrgovic and the boys.
Yeah, the boys did a heck of a job. I mean, I thought it was going to be a reasonably close fight. It would go the distance. Then I was going with the boys in that fight. I didn't think he would be as impressive as he was. And I'm going to tell you, watching the first round of the fight, I didn't think the boys was going to win after,
No, he showed he had heart. They questioned his heart. He showed he had it.
No, well, Hrgovic was throwing some mean right hands.
Yes, he was.
The problem is, he wasn't cutting the ring off. He was just firing long rights. and
That
not
was it.
getting within range. And then he eventually got tired. And like we said, Du Bois is a player now. A fight with him and Joshua in the UK, he'll do big.
Jack, I never saw Du Bois more purposeful. He showed that he has two hands. He put his punches together. He had a semblance of a battle plan. He was on a mini mission, and he was fighting a guy that only was throwing right hands, who he couldn't miss. And Du Bois wanted more. I think Hrgovic's mouth, the way he talked, how he's going to smash him, and when they sparred, he beat him up. I think that played on Du Bois, and I think that Du Bois. I still think sometimes, like I say, that Joshua sometimes goes to bed at night and he thinks about the 10th round that he let get away after beating Usyk up in the 9th of their second fight. I think that maybe Du Bois probably has a little bit of that himself when he thinks about how he ended up losing to Usyk after I thought hurt him with a body shot. So I like how Du Bois is rebounded, Jack, but I don't like how he is so open for that right hand. And if Joshua nails him with them right hands, he's going to hurt him and stop him.
Yeah. During that show, His Excellency said something I'm going to have to disagree with strongly, as you will. And he's the last person we want to criticize, because it's wonderful what he's giving the sport now. And if he could keep it up, wow, he's the best thing that's happened, for ages, because he's a true fight fan. He loves it. But when you call,
you could tell he does.
One of the greatest fighters of all time, let's hold off. Maybe Bivol will prove it before his career's over. You never know. But the next step ought to better be they're going to fight in October. It was supposed to be last Saturday, but Beterbiev got injured. And I'm going to tell you, I am slightly wavering, Frank. I was very firm that Beterbiev was going to knock Bivol out. But I'm going to tell you, Beterbiev is approaching the age of 40. And don't misunderstand me. I think he would be in good form against Bivol. But am I maybe underrating Bivol a little bit? Because that would be Bivol's super fight, not the Canelo fight with Bivol. That wasn't a super fight to him, because the average fan thought Canelo was definitely going to win. It was just another fight for Canelo, and Bivol, rose to the occasion. But now this is a genuine super fight, which is regarded as 50-50 amongst boxing fans. And this delay, it could only hurt Beterbiev more. And Bivol very smartly took a fight in the interim. He wanted to keep busy. He has a Usyk-type mentality. He's focused all the way on Beterbiev. And I know Beterbiev is very focused himself. He trains hard. I know his trainer well, John Scully. By the way, Thursday night, John Scully is one of the honorees at the Boxing Writers Association's annual awards banquet, but he won't be there because he's in Canada with one of his fighters, Stephen Butler. So yours truly is going to accept on behalf of John Scully, who trains Beterbiev. You like the way I gave myself a plug, Frank. Just threw it in there to make myself look good, important. But the thing is, at this point, you in the beginning were picking Beterbiev, but you had tilted, Bivol, but you had tilted to Beterbiev. I was with Beterbiev all the time.
Jack, I was never picking Bivol.
Oh, you never had at any point?
I always favor Beterbiev. But let me ask you this, Jack.
Are you wavering just a little bit the way I am?
If I have to pick right now, I'm taking Beterbiev, and I'm going to tell you why. I watched Bivol fight Saturday against Malik Zinad, and I was sitting there and I was saying to myself, what is the big hype over Bivol? He's a good fighter fundamentally. He does not do one thing great. He was a 5-1 underdog when he fought Canelo. That's his signature win. And I was sitting there, Jack, and I'm watching the fight, and I'm saying to myself, is Bivol better than Yaki Lopez? What would Yaki Lopez do to the guy that Bivol was fighting? And that was a pretty much not an even fight, but Bivol didn't set himself apart until that 6th round. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking,
oh, he was clearly winning. No,
he was winning,
ahead.
Jack, but he wasn't over. He wasn't impressive. He had nobody in front of him, okay? So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I think this light heavyweight division is very pedestrian, and I have gone round and round with you and other guys about this. Don't tell me that Marvin Johnson, Victor Galindez, or Saad would not be champion today, and that everybody that better be beat and that Bivol beat, they would probably beat, and they would have beat more conclusively. And I was thinking, Bivol was a 5-1 underdog against Canelo. Now, he beats Canelo, and now he walks on water. Well, I got news for you, Jack. I watched him close. I think he's very good fundamentally. I think he's solid in every area. He does not do one thing great. I don't think he's unbeatable. So to me, better be beating him or Bivol beating him. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I think they're both big fish in a small pond. And I think Saad and Johnson and Galindez would walk through these guys. Both of them.
You want to know why, Frank? The level of competition might not be as great as back in the day because you have all the different weight classes. I mean, we talk about the super middleweight division. It meant nothing back in the day. It was like a reject division, as was the junior middleweight division. But think of fighters like Joe Calzaghe and Andre Ward. They would have been light heavyweights.
They would have had problems.
Light heavyweight. So, but not right exactly, but just think, instead of those two being called the two greatest super middleweights of all time and being
well, Roy Jones has something to say about that, but go ahead.
Right. Well, Roy Jones would have been great no matter what weight class, whatever. No problem, as far as that goes.
Right. But I think the division is very pedestrian. And I was watching Bivol, Jack, and I thought, man, I see this guy's in top 5 pound for pound. Everybody has him up there. I'm saying, like, why? He's good. Nice jab, tight right hand, throws the hook and uppercut nice. But it's like, don't tell me that this guy is great. He is not great. I need to see more. I'm not sure. Bivol's better beat is great. It's a good fight. They're the two best in the division. I'm glad the fight's being made. I can see either guy losing it. If I'm forced to pick today, I will pick Beterbiev, but I won't bet on him.
Okay, there was another good fight on the show, a really good fight. Nick Ball against Raymond Ford. Nick Ball wins the split decision. All cards 115, 113. I had it 114, 114. No complaint about the decision. It could have gone to either guy, at all. But it was a very good fight. Very enjoyable.
That's the fight where I left and went and got something to eat down the street and brought it back, so I missed a lot of it.
Well, why did you do that? I would have told you the scouting report. That was an excellent fight. Why didn't you leave during the Hutchinson-Richards fight, the first fight? I
wasn't hungry then. I realized I was hungry, and I wanted to make sure I was back for the Bivol fight and the 2 heavyweight fights.
Yeah, but good fight, an excellent fight. Nick Ball, Raymond Ford, each giving it all. They're all in. Ford, he's good, but forget about Ford. He's moving up in weight to 130. But what's interesting about the fight, Ball has a ton of heart, throws a ton of punches. He's not that hard a hitter, but he comes to fight. He's all out.
No, he does. He's aggressive, stays on you.
The monster, in a way, he moves up. Nick Ball is right there for him. The monster destroys Nick Ball. He destroys him. And Nick Ball's a very good fighter. But so we talk about moving up in weight classes. You could do it with the right opponents. Now, you don't move up if Tank Davis is waiting for you at 130 unless they're giving you an incredible amount of money.
Are you talking about Inouye moving up the fight, Tank?
No, Tank fights at 135 in reality.
Okay.
But the point is, you can move up as many weight divisions if you want, if you have the right opponent there. That's what I'm
Right.
trying to say. I mean, you joked around about Adrian Broner. If Broner hypothetically could still make 140, I knew he would beat Broner at 140. I want to hear, well, he's giving away weight. No, he
Oh,
beat him without any problems.
wait, who would beat who, Jack? I'm confused.
I knew he would beat Adrian Broner giving up all that weight.
Oh, I don't think so.
Frank, you fighters used to routinely do that. You would have
Jack,
said, Emil,
did Pacquiao stop Broner? No. Look at all the big names that Broner was in with, Jack. None of them stopped him, and they all hit harder, and Pacquiao throws as many punches as Inoue. There's no way Adrian Broner would lose to Inoue if Inoue has to come up and fight him at 140. I don't think Broner can make 140, but if he did, not happening. I think you're crazy to think that.
Frank, Broner's actually fighting June 7th in Miami against Blair Cobbs. Don King at age 92 is promoting that show. It's not a bad show that he's putting on. Like, you look at some of the fights, he had a fallout on one of the WBC champions, a no-name African guy who he promotes. But the idea is for WBC world title. And the main event is Broner and Blair Cobbs. Blair Cobbs is a little bit of a showman. He's not a bad fighter. To me, he's not world class, but he's good. You could argue he's maybe a top 20 fighter, as a welterweight.
Broner can be a top 20 fighter if he's in shape.
Right. So it's an intriguing type fight. And kudos to Don King putting on that show.
Jack, just say this again so I'm clear. You would take Inoue over Broner if they fought at 140.
Right now, the way Broner is now, yeah.
Well, they can't go back in time, so it's got to be now.
Without any problems.
Jack, please give me what's in your coffee.
You would have said, Frank, I wish we was doing this show back in the day, because I could see you and I getting into an argument, me saying Roy Jones is going to defeat John Ruiz.
I pick Roy Jones to win that fight, Jack.
Okay, but he was giving up all the weight. So why is it okay to pick Roy Jones to be the bigger
because
guy?
Roy Jones was a 200-pound man. He's not a guy that started at 110 moving up to fight a big guy like Broner. It's completely different. Roy Jones is all-world skill, and he was a boxer, Jack. He didn't have to fight and trade with him. Inoue is a small guy that fights like a big guy. He would have to carry the Broner. I don't think Inoue could tickle Broner. It boggles my mind that you could actually think that. It really does.
Super fighters move up and can move up, and they can make things happen. I admit the weight that could have a bearing on things.
That's why there's weight classes, Jack. You're right. They have a bearing.
We were talking about Zhang and Wilder before, and what no one brought up, Zhang outweighed him by what, like
60 pounds.
60
but
pounds.
Wilder, if you're 215 pounds, you're big enough to knock anybody out. Okay? In a boxing ring, anybody that's 215, 220, you are big enough to knock anybody out. Wilder doesn't have confidence and didn't let his punches go.
When Roberto Duran fought Marvin Hagler, was Duran in his prime?
He was on a nice run, but he was not in his prime.
Okay. When was he at his prime? When he was a lightweight. Fair enough?
Yes.
And he knocked out De Jesus a couple of times.
I think his prime was between the third De Jesus fight and the first Leonard fight. I don't think he was ever better.
Let's say the first Leonard fight, he definitely was in his prime. He was a welterweight. The Duran at Montreal, I could say, would have beaten Hagler that night in Las Vegas instead of the later version of Duran that lost a competitive 15-round decision. And he was a much smaller guy. And Hagler's an all-time great, but Duran's a little greater.
Pound for pound, Duran's greater than Hagler.
And I say that Duran of Montreal would have defeated Hagler had that same Duran been in the ring against Hagler in Las Vegas in 1983.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Okay.
Because he was strong enough to back Leonard up and maul him. He could never do that to Hagler. As good as he was in Montreal, and that was an all-time great performance. I can't see that, Jack. But I still don't see how that correlates to Broner and Inoue. Inoue was 110 pounds. No, neither Donaire went 12 rounds with him and gave him a good fight.
He did. That Donaire did. That's the only thing that bothers me about Inoue, that Donaire gave him all he could handle, for that fight. But in the rematch, he made quick work of Donaire. Before we go on, you had mentioned earlier in the show about this being an anniversary date, a sad anniversary date.
Right. On this date, 8 years ago, Muhammad Ali, also known as Cassius Marcellus Clay, died at age 74 years old of heart failure. And, I just think that, for maybe the last 40 years of Ali's life, he was the most recognized person on the planet. I mean, he was one of one. His birth date, his passing date have to be acknowledged. There's nothing that you or I can say about him that hasn't been said, written. There's just nothing we can say. But I know this much. He's the reason why I'm sitting here. And I can't even say he was my favorite fighter to watch, but nobody took or drew people to the sport like Ali. He had a charisma about him. And Jack, the funniest thing about Ali that people overlook all the time is guy was good looking. He was funny. He wasn't a bully. And Jack, he was as tough as any Rocky Gargoyle there's ever been in the history of the game. When you think about it, when the old timers, the Bill Gallows, the D'Amatos, the Fleischers, what's the one thing they did? They always want to say, well, let's see what happens when he gets hit. Let's see how he holds up to a shot. And here it turns out that he took a shot as well or better than any other heroes. And the one thing about him that they questions the most is what he had an abundance of. That, along with physical, applicable ring strength. Ali's strength was always underrated because he wasn't a knockout puncher.
I'll tell you, the first coming of Ali, which was the best coming of Ali, when he held the title 1964 to 1967, Joe Louis did an article for Ring Magazine where they interviewed him, and the headlines on the front page of the Ring.
How I would have beat Clay.
How I would have clobbered Clay.
Clobbered Clay.
And Lewis's thing was that Clay, let's call him Clay because that's what Lewis referred to him at the time, and most people referred to him as Clay at the time, that Clay couldn't fight off the ropes. Okay, that was his thing, which is ironic. And Lewis said, I didn't see the Henry Cooper knockdown of Clay, but I bet it came when he was on the ropes. And it actually came with, Clay coming off the ropes at that moment. But it's ironic then, the rope-a-dope is the thing that probably would have did Lewis in if the two of them ever fought. I mean, it's certain the second coming of Ali would have leaned back on the ropes and he would have done everything to, just survive, which he probably would have.
Yeah, I don't think he would have roped with Doug Lewis, Jack. I think he would have tied. He would have clinched him like Frazier, like he did Frazier. I don't think he would have gone back and let Lewis rip him with clean shots like he did Foreman. I think Lewis, like Frazier, with those shorter shots, Ali would have had a hard time seeing them and picking them off. Where George was a little wider, more of a headhunter. He could do that against him. I think he would have just clinched Lewis on the ropes.
Well, considering he rope-a-dope Joe Frazier in their first fight,
it didn't work.
That was the birth of the rope-a-dope, not the
yes, it was
fight, the first Frazier fight. And it didn't work against Frazier only because Frazier had the stamina not to fade out. He could keep
Jack, it didn't work against Leon Spinks the first time either.
Yeah, correct.
I mean, he was older, but he did try the rope-a-dope.
We were talking before the show, and I think Ali was an what do we talk about? An underachiever. I think he could have achieved more. I really did. I mean, there was no reason to be out of shape in the Jimmy Young fight. He should have been in shape. Maybe he wouldn't have looked so good against Jimmy Young, but he would have beaten Jimmy Young had he been training all along and living the life of a fight. And it wouldn't have been probably that controversial a fight. Maybe Young gives him a good fight, loses 9-6, 10-5, but it wouldn't have been as debatable a decision. He definitely doesn't lose the first Leon Spinks fight. If he was living the life of a fighter, if he was training all along, let's say like your favorite fighter, Floyd Mayweather, who I mentioned, just being dedicated. That's all I'm talking about.
Floyd was in shape for 20 straight years, no doubt.
Floyd kept in shape. Okay, he wasn't as great as Ali, but that's not the point. He kept in shape. He didn't cheat himself. He gave himself the best chance of winning and looking good. And Ali, he says, I just need 3 weeks to train for Chuck Wepner. You don't, okay, it works, but you don't it catches up to you. If you're training 3-4 weeks for a fight, what are you doing in between fights? It means you're not doing a darn thing.
Jack, you know what hurt Ali? Ali never adjusted to his body after the exile. And then when he came back, he found out how tough he was and how durable he was. And then after Foreman, it totally changed him, Jack, because he says, okay, none of these guys can knock me out. I'm just going to go through the motions, pick my spots, and when they get tired, I will turn it on. But at that time, Jack, after Foreman, he was such a huge celebrity and going around the world and eating and being America's or the guests of the world all over. I just don't think that training was important to him. He knew his legacy was set because he beat Foreman. And if you think about it, Ali was only really great when he had something to prove or he felt threatened by the other guy. And you could tell there weren't many guys that he felt threatened by. That's why he had some stinkers.
But look at the 3 Kenny Norton fights. All of them very close fights, came down to the final round, no matter what you think of the decision.
The last 2 did.
As far as I'm concerned, never had any true separation between the 2 of them. The first fight, I mean, Norton was in great shape for all 3 fights. And to top it off, Norton trained between fights. He trained between fights. He always kept himself ready. He was living the life of a fighter. Even though Norton may have had a little bit of a big ego, he wasn't a worldwide celebrity just running around and saying, you're signing for a fight. I'll go to training camp. I'll start training in a few weeks. And the first fight, Ali was out of shape. Flat out of shape. He loses a close fight. The second fight he trained hard for, but he had his jaw broken from coming out of shape. And by the time he had to catch up in that training camp. And then the third fight, he trained hard for the third fight, for the fight itself. But what was he doing in the interim, in the lead up to the fight?
Getting kicked in the legs by Inoki.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't even in shape for Antonio. And
that's what killed him. But Jack, that's what I'm saying. He had so many other things going on that definitely hurt his boxing. And as far as the Norton fights go, Jack, everybody has that opponent. Frazier could never beat Bonavena really conclusively. Marciano had his hands full with Ted Lowry. Bernard Hopkins never beat Jermaine Taylor conclusively, and there's no comparison between the 2 of them as fighters. It's like everybody has that guy.
Bernard Hopkins never beat Jermaine Taylor in the record.
On the record, I thought he won the first fight.
I
Correct.
thought he won the second fight, Hopkins, and lost the first fight, but it
That's
should have
funny.
probably been 1-1, you know, in all actuality.
But Jack, but Hopkins, we know, was in shape, and he really was up for the fight because he wanted to beat DiBella's guy.
Frazier clearly beat Bonavina in the second fight. He got tired in the later rounds, but that's not a decision that anyone has any quarrel
Jack,
with.
I was at the fight. I understand that. My point is, though, it's hard to find many clips where Frazier, in the course of 25 rounds, is really beating up Oscar Bonavina. He's ahead of him through most of the rounds, but as far as beating him up and really working him over, no. Bonavina gave him trouble, just like Ted Lowry gave Marciano trouble. Every great fighter has that guy. So I'm not going to kill Ali with Norton. I think the young Ali matches up better with Norton.
If they fight more than once, we were talking about Joe Louis before. The thing that made Joe Louis so great, or one of the things for sure, his ability to adjust. You know, in rematches, he was always better the second time around. I mean, the first fight with certain guys, he could be so-so, not up from Arturo Godoy. His style of crouching gave Louis fits. Louis had a bad night. You know, Godoy, actually, I think got a vote on one of the judges' scorecards, if I'm not mistaken. But in the rematch, Louis chops him up. Buddy Bear, he got knocked out of the ring. Climbed back in, stop banned 6 rounds, I think it was. It was officially called a disqualification. The rematch, he destroys him in the round. The Schmeling loss, he destroys him in the round in the rematch. Oh, wait, Billy Khan gave him fits the first fight, rematch, stops him in 8 rounds, even though it was years later, and they weren't the same fighters. I've got Jersey Joe Walcott, I don't want to say a washed up Joe Louis, but a clearly past his prime Joe Louis in the rematch knocks out Jersey Joe, who was in his prime.
But Louis was losing the fight. He had to come from behind.
The second fight, I think it was pretty even, as I recall.
On the scorecards, but I thought the consensus was that he was kind of a little trailing in the fight.
Well, we'll have to look that up. I'm not certain about that, but it was a conclusive ending.
So what are you saying? That if he fought Ali 3 times, what?
You know, Louis would be better. I mean, this is a tribute to Ali. I feel prime for prime, he beats Joe Louis. He just has the style, and he's too athletic, too better, too many angles. But the only one night, the night Louis fought Max Baer, is the one night I would give him over Ali, where I just feel, you know, Louis was far better than he ever was any other night. And he wasn't a shuffling fighter. He was fast on his feet.
Ali said that, but that was not true.
Excuse me?
Louis was not a shuffler. He actually had good footwork. He cut off the ring great. He just didn't go out of his way to chase guys to track them down.
But we agree. But
look, I would say at their best, I think Ali wins. But if they fought 3 times, I think Louis would get one.
Yeah, people forget how great Louis was. It's just society there, you know, how they are. Just like future generations, unfortunately, might forget how great Ali was. You know, they go with the latest, like, oh, was Mayweather better than Sugar Ray Leonard, better than Sugar Ray Robinson? But then again, I'm not that sure, because when we see posts, Frank, on social media, who would have won between Leonard and Mayweather, most people say Leonard. So I think there's a large degree of sanity.
Jack, there's something about that undefeated record. The Miami Dolphins live on forever because of it. Mayweather does. And if Usyk retires undefeated, in 20 years, he's going to be higher on that list than we can imagine. I really do believe that. That undefeated record, when they never lose, you can say, okay, well, who'd they fight? They missed this guy or that guy. But the fact is, we never saw them that get beat. They always get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's an ID card as unbeaten. Okay, good show, Frank.
I like that.
Covered a lot. Hall of Fame weekend this weekend, like I said before. It's a boxing celebration. And then the next big pay-per-view event we'll talk about maybe next week in the middle of June, Tank Davis, Frank Martin.
And the Tyson fight's been called off, right? If whatever that was.
Yeah, it's been
my heart's breaking over that, Jack.
Okay. See you next week, Frank.
Everybody have a good night. Thanks for watching.